need for making mobile telecommunications resilient, and the realization that our ordinary kind of carrier approach is actually like completely unresilient. It's really fragile. It's dependent on towers, it's dependent on long-range links, and phone calls in this room probably go via Sydney, and all of these sorts of difficulties. And so we set about making software that enables voice calls, SMS, or we call it MeshMS, it's our mesh version, and file exchange over our Rhizome store and forward system to be really resilient forms of communication. And one of the key things is that you can collect a file or a message for someone, and the phones will replicate it like Usenet, and eventually it'll get copied onto the right device, and then that device will go, bing, oh look, you've got a new message. So it's that kind of resilient approach. So what these slides are from, about 11 months ago, we went over the invitation of New Zealand Red Cross to work with them on what they're calling succinct data, which is applying these kind of mesh communications approaches with low bandwidth satellite SMS modules. So actually I should have brought the thing with us. You can get it's a hand-sized thing that will do SMS over the Iridium constellation. The really funny thing is, how like the standard list price for a SMS over a regular carrier network is what, about 25 cents a message? Over the Iridium network, it's about 25 cents a message. But you get 8-bit bytes. So in fact, you're actually getting better value out of an incredibly uncost-effective satellite constellation as we can out of our domestic carriers.
SMS is more expensive than sending data to the Voyager program.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, SMS per megabyte. So say if we had 32 megabytes of data here that we needed to get to London, would it be cheaper, A, to send it all via SMS at the list price via Telstra, or would it be cheaper, B, to book a suite on an A380 in both directions and carry it on a memory stick? The answer is, of course, B. So if anyone has some data they need to move to the UK, please let me know. And I think we can do it for, it's only about $30,000 or something for a return suite like that. But you'll be saving a good $45,000 or so compared to SMS. But so back in the land of more serious and sensible, so they wanted to be able to keep track of teams when they're out and about in the field, and to be able to coordinate their activity in more effective ways, and also to be able to collect data from in the field. So they, the longer term goal, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, because we're actually going to head off with them again in about a month, and hopefully we'll have our software finished that we need for it, is to actually be able to go out and collect field reports. It might be, family has 3 adults, 5 kids, 9 goats, and they need a whole pile of stuff, but obviously they don't need milk or cheese. And just collecting this kind of information that then comes back, and then they can coordinate and go, okay, we need to order in 400,000 blankets and a whole pile of Weet-Bix to use the goat milk. So it's thinking of, it really is, it's providing, I would call it situation awareness, really. And so last year what we did with the early version of the Serval Mesh, which I'm quite happy to admit was largely cobbled together and tied up with duct tape and baling twine. In fact, we actually on the Android phones we had a complete installation of Asterisk. That was an example of just how quickly cobbled together a solution. So the APK was like 6 meg and installed into like 25 megabytes or something as it extracted this whole thing. If you want to ask about porting Asterisk to Android, it's a very entertaining process. But back at the point. So we had this early system, and we proved that, yes, in fact, we could do it. And it was really interesting. By the end of the week, we had some of so KiwiX itself is the IT and Telecommunications Emergency Response Unit in New Zealand, which is one of 5 globally, only 5, who are called in to provide telecoms support for other Red Cross units when they deploy. And so Matthew Lloyd, who runs that team, likes every year to get them out on a field exercise and as closely as possible simulate real field environments. So they're made to pass through slightly fictitious passport controls, and actually, they're actually asked to actually bring their real passports with them, and they get their papers checked. And of course, they're bringing in crazy high-powered radio gear, and so they have to have all the import papers for that, and they go through all of that process. And then, they're doing the things they need to do. They get harassed by militia. Of course, it's probably really not quite kosher for those of us on the disruption teams to actually turn up with AK-47s and the real militia toys It's much more fun actually. So last year we had a rather OH&S obsessed militia who basically came around and were reading out the customer service agreements and detaining them with endless telemarketing style paperwork, which was equally effective. It was actually really fun because we'd pre-arranged with one of the guys. We gave him basically a gold membership card for the militia, sort of Terry Pratchett style of if you're a member of the guild then you get treated better and all of these sorts of things. And so we were going through this thing and we had the 3 cars in a row all lined up there. And so, we're doing the spiel to each one in each car, saying, if you have if any of you are members with the militia guild, to please present your cards now. And the first couple of cars is kind of like whatever, and the sniggers, and then we sort of get to the back car, and then unbeknownst to the other 3 guys in the car, this guy says, "Oh no, yep, I've got mine with me," and they're like, "Oh, excellent, oh, platinum member, sir, fantastic. Like just if you could just pull your vehicle out and proceed down to the front of the queue." And then they all got to hop out and go to a refreshment centre and got happily refreshed while we largely ransacked their car and decided what few things to pinch. But I think they actually came out in front, and actually I think those guys actually didn't give our pens back either on signing the paperwork. We had receipts when we kind of took their gear to sort of add to the paperwork. But so we sort of have these disruptions and things to try and simulate the real delays, because they had the missions to achieve in set time frames. So as lighthearted as some of this was, it was about doing what they needed to do in a day. So we'll just go through what Matthew has provided. Some of this is things that I think we'll be quite familiar with, and this is really from a Red Cross to other agency perspective. So smartphones, they can do a whole pile of stuff. But without a network, they're pretty useless. So, obviously we're looking at alternatives. So we're using our mesh phones with Wi-Fi based mesh, and we have an animated one. So we have phones that can mesh together. We can bring in another phone. We can mesh those together. Bring another phone, and maybe this one's out of range. So then we can put some kind of booster device, as a mesh potato that David Rowe will be quite familiar with. And then we can use, say, the Seville mapping tool. And so the blue point would be yourself, the red points are other people. And this was, OpenStreetMaps, curiously enough, didn't actually have a great deal of detail about the middle of a pine forest in New Zealand. And so it's presumably the correct name of the place. And so the yellow point would actually be a point of interest. So you might be marking that a road is out or that there's people that need assistance. And we can then add in other fascinating ways. So the mesh can synchronise to things as they pass by. I mean, a little bit facetious with the bike, but actually totally feasible, because the software automatically synchronises data onto devices, and this was part of what we were prototyping. And I remember sitting in because we got to, being part of the staff, we got to stay in these lovely cottages over here. Meanwhile, everyone else stayed about 1 kilometre away on some grass. So it's good to be in the organisation of these things rather than in there. And this is actually their HF radio masts, and the first thing to be set up was the satellite dish for internet. So the IT&T guys are very much of like-mindedness to ourselves, I suspect. But so I remember sitting in the accommodation there and hearing the convoy coming back in at the end of the day and thinking, oh, I better go and take my phone and synchronise to get the data off of their phone onto mine so that we could actually upload to our map display to show where everyone had been. And we had this up on the internet so that observers outside could see what was going on as well. And so I thought, I better go and do that. And I thought, I'll just do one last copy off of my phone. I'm like, oh no, it's all right. They drove within Wi-Fi range. It had automatically synchronised onto my phone. And I just pushed it straight up. I didn't have to get out of my seat to do it. And it was just, there was moments like that were just tremendous. And because we had, so the software was very early at the time, and we were integrating with 2 other companies' kind of stuff as well. We were the only open source group. And so I think we had 9 software updates or something. Jeremy can probably remember the craziness of that week. If it was just, they'd do some fixes or whatever, and then I'd be back on the satellite phone back to base saying, oh yes, and this isn't working now, and we need this, and they've done this, and they haven't done that, and we need to make this work. And so we were pushing out software updates. The best way to get software updates out in that setting was actually over the mesh itself. So we're actually using our Rhizome store and forward mechanism. pushing out updates. I'd go and meet with the team leaders in the operations centre, and we told them on the first day, look, whenever you come in, bring your phones in with the mesh running, and I'll have my phone with the mesh running, and by the time we've gone through all of the stuff, your phones will actually have the software and whatever updates you need, and that will have copied all the data that I need back off of those phones. So they did that, and then they go back to their teams. It would synchronise onto their teams by the time they'd explain to them, hey, you need to put this software update on, and then it stops this crash or it adds this feature. And so it was, for all of the faults that it had in the very early software, it was just compelling in what it was able to do. And by sort of the fourth or fifth day of the week, we had a couple of guys saying, oh, have you got the requisition forms on the mesh yet? We're sick and tired of filling out the paper ones. And it was a really pleasing moment that, I mean, they've been really tolerant with the very early versions of the software that we were using, but it was still utile enough, and they could see the potential enough that they could see moving a bunch of things across onto the mesh. And indeed, this year, we're hoping that if we get everything sorted, actually, that they will be doing their logistics requests via the mesh, so that the guy operating the logistics bus with all the gear in it will actually get their orders before they turn up, and it will actually be of great operational use. So again, this is just from more of Matthew's slides. So this is the little SMS satellite modules, and so we're using the live tracking from that as well, because we're trying out a whole pile of things at the same time with this. Yes, and so we'll compare the InReach to an Android phone by Bluetooth, and we'd written software to interface that so that we could push the message traffic back and forth. And then, of course, InReach had their own fun stuff. This is obviously not in the middle of the forest. It hasn't been subdivided yet, which is fairly fortunate.
So where did this thing happen?
Where did it happen? Goodness me. Now you're going to test my memory of Kiwi place names. It was inland from Wanganui Bay, I think.
The map looked like Wanganui.
Sorry?
The map looked like Wanganui.
You can tell by the bend in the track. Yeah.
Oh no, the big
Sorry. Yes.
I know that very well.
Yeah, that's right.
No, the bigger photo, the bigger map that you had.
Yes.
The turned out one.
Yeah.
And New Zealand's a really small place.
That's right. So for those of us that haven't been there, so North Island, bottom of the North Island, you've got Wellington, the capital, and it's slightly northwest, sort of, we're about, 20 or 30 k's inland. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, look, absolutely. And covering a range of about 150 kilometres from top to bottom. So for all that the Wi-Fi range on these is only a couple of 100 metres, the fact that the mesh stores and forwards the data meant that we're actually able to get useful data. And so we got something like, it was 110,000 telemetry points off of the teams. And actually tracking your staff on deployment is actually really, really, really important for these organisations, because they need to make sure that their people remain safe and can be tracked. And that also actually reduces the risk of bad things happening to them if the local militia and all the rest of it that are armed with more than paperwork actually know that they're actually being actively tracked, and it's going to be harder for them to do naughty things.
So is that the range of the mesh network that you said?
So the mesh is, it's Wi-Fi range. So in open country, 1 to 200 metres between each hop of phones. But of course, as the phones move closer to other phones, and they come in range, and it synchronises. So quite like Usenet. Sorry?
Was the place name on that?
Yeah. So the correct pronunciation is it
Whanganui word. That's the current
official pronunciation. Yep.
But there is just what's today.
Yes. But I vaguely recall being assured that it's definitely not Wanganui, which would be the otherwise standard Australian pronunciation for that spelling. But it was fun, because we had, do we have any of our American friends here in the room with us? Excellent, because we had some Americans there, and so there was some friendly rivalry between the two hemispheres.
As opposed to the vicious rivalry between the Australians and the New Zealanders.
One just needs to be relaxed as an Australian in New Zealand, and just remember, when they ask where you're from, you just say, I'm from the West Island, and it's all totally fine. Yes. So Kestrel were providing some structured form systems for the thing as well. So this was again getting pushed over the InReach, and so this technology, we'd always planned for this functionality to be in the serval mesh. So we're combining a thing called the Open Data Kit (ODK) that lets you fill in structured forms by XML, and then we can either backhaul by Wi-Fi, or hopefully it will come in and show that we can go via the mesh. Yep, and then. Yes, potentially by InReach as well. So we can kind of, if we take all the XML out of an XML document, you're left with like about 8 bytes out of the typical megabyte of XML.
That's called the actual information.
Yes, that's right. And so we can entropy code that typically down to about 2 bits, and then feed that across in a fairly efficient way. And so we're looking at doing much the same this time around for KiwiX. So,
have you tried to use it in some actual disasters in Australia and New Zealand, like fires or
no,
earthquake?
Yeah, so we haven't actually used it in any in earnest deployment yet. We still feel that we need to do more work to mature it to that point. Whereas the trial exercise, it's with it's highly IT savvy people using it, and who are actually they know that we're actually doing testing as well on it. That they expect that there will be issues, and so. For us, they show us what the needs are that they actually have, and that really helps us to knock the corner, like any kind of user testing. And so it's tremendously valuable user testing from our perspective. We've kind of been through this. One interesting thing, of course, the cost is actually much, much, much cheaper for these organisations. So they're all kind of moving from HF analog radio and VHF and UHF handsets to digital packet radio, which incidentally a lot of people that are older and actually know that the limitations of both analog and digital aren't that thrilled about. But $50 phone versus $800 handset, it's there's some compelling arguments to be made, particularly if we can supplement it with longer range communications with the mesh helper device concept that we've talked about earlier in the day.
It would also be safer because a handset doesn't look like something.
Yes. Yeah, so it's safer because the handsets don't look odd. Also, it turns out that these are really easy to get through any airport. So one of the things that actually, the number of phones, I think my record of phones carried on my person through an airport is 11. And so that's on that occasion. The other record for the strangest phone hardware carried through an airport and worn into an aeroplane on the way to the US, I might add, post 9/11, was actually wearing my shoe phone. Which was, I checked with airport security and everything first to make sure it wouldn't be a problem, but I was surprised at how totally not a problem there was, given that the bottom plate of the shoe was held on with a large sharp screw, and it was just kind of...
It wasn't a drink in a bottle.
Yeah, that's right. Indeed. What was the shoe phone for? Largely it was because I could. I made it for a church camp. So there's a church Christian Endeavour camp that's held every year in the hills back from Adelaide, and they typically have kind of movie-related themes because it's sort of for teenager to early 20s. And so this particular year they said, "Oh, look, let's have a Get Smart kind of theme." And they said, "You're an engineer. We'd like a shoe phone, a cone of silence, and a phone box." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I think I can do that."
Every parent wants a cone of silence.
Yeah, but the really interesting thing, the cone of silence, when you actually make a real one, it works just as well as the one in the show. I now believe that all the jokes around the cone of silence are actually from when they actually tried it out and actually realised that the acoustics are fascinating when you have that kind of double dumbbell shape. Everyone outside can in fact hear you and you can't hear each other. It really does work as advertised. And a 19-inch rack with a glass door and a bit of sticky tape and a cheap plastic payphone actually works fantastically as a phone. The campus had a fantastic time. No, that's right. It weighs more than 7 kilos. Yeah. Slightly hard to get up into the overhead lockers. But yeah, and the kids loved it because they kind of had to do all these challenges, and then they basically got to use the shoe phone to ring control to report who the agents were and stuff. It was good fun. Yes. I was surprised. I thought that someone would have made a shoe phone that actually worked prior to that, but no one actually had made a proper wearable one. The closest is a basketball player in the US who has size 89 shoes, who just basically chiseled out a canoe size hole and put a some large mobile
The
phone
old
in there.
brick phones in.
That's right, but then he proceeded to break it because when you need size 93 shoes, like you can't actually take any of it out without them breaking. So I'm not sure whether we have pictures in here otherwise. Have I used all my time, or do we have...
Yeah. We got maybe time for one more question.
Well, yeah, so if people want to ask questions, and I'll see if I can find some pretty photos to show at the same time.
Put your hand up and we'll just bring the microphone. Have a-
Could you maybe give an example or two of things that you learned from the networking experience in the field and that you may change the project from?
Sure. So one of the things we found actually was when you put 20 mesh phones into a room, that they could actually get quite chatty. They're worse than ducks. You know, like if you have ducks separately, they don't quack. You put ducks together and they quack. So mesh phones kind of behave the same. But also what we discovered actually was that the Red Cross, actually, they didn't care about voice. They didn't care about the immediate real-time communications. What they cared about was this sync data content of small pieces of information that could actually be used to inform what they're doing. And even, I mean, you know, the battery life is fairly dreadful and is still suboptimal. That's reasonably manageable for them. But yeah, it was this realisation that the store and forward and structured form entry really were the valuable things, and combining the local mesh to get large data through quickly and cheaply with the satellite for when there's no other option available. And it was, yeah, that combination really made for quite a compelling solution, I think. And certainly we have a great deal of excitement from our partner in New Zealand, Red Cross, who is this man here, Matthew Lloyd. And so this is a chap from Kestrel and a bunch of the other guys there. So that was setting up the... And feel free to ask questions while I just flip through pretty pictures. Yes?
Just one, yeah,
Did any of the synthetic militia know about the Seville project and have try and do any like DOS attacks on it or anything like that?
No, to be quite honest, for the early versions of the software, there was no need to actually arrange DOS attacks. It was a built-in feature in the early versions.
It's not that bad.
That's right, but we've taken that out and it's reduced the APK size by about 4 meg.
So I can imagine out in the field that these Red Cross teams might be quite few and very far between. So realistically, what sort of range or how can that be dealt with?
Yeah, so this is really why we're using those satellite SMS modules. So you'd have a team who would be within Wi-Fi range of each other and of their vehicle. And sort of the longer term vision we have is actually something on the vehicle which is probably with a decent plus 3B or plus 6 dB Wi-Fi antenna, instead of some of these phones that have, depending on the orientation, up to about minus 10 dB, we believe, possibly even worse. And one of the fascinating things, like Wi-Fi here in this room actually has pretty poor range. You get out into the open country and there's no microwave ovens, there's not 800 other delegates all trying to check their Gmail at the same time, and just, you know, all of that kind of thing disappears. And so we found range between phones can be like 200 to 300 metres in the open. So particularly, we went up to Arkaroola in the outback in South Australia, and you know, it was pretty much ideal for Wi-Fi. Like you're talking about, you know, like 6% humidity or something. There's no vegetation. We're on ridgetop A. Someone else is on ridgetop B. You've got, you know, Fresnel zones and clear horizons, and it was all lovely. And we're getting around 300. I think, because we're using G1 phones, and I think they actually have better Wi-Fi antenna. Because I reckon a couple of the links we had were nearer 500 metres.